Welcome to this lesson on Sonnet 1 from Sir Philip Sidney's famous sonnet sequence Astrophil and Stella. This is the very first sonnet of the sequence, and it introduces us to a lover named Astrophil, who wants to express his true love for Stella through poetry. But as we will see, he struggles to find the right words. In the end, he learns an important lesson. The best poetry does not come from copying others, it comes from the heart. First, let us begin with the life of Sir Philip Sidney. Sir Philip Sidney was born on the 30th of November 1554 at Penshurst Place. He came from a rich and powerful family. His father was Sir Henry Sidney, and his mother was Lady Mary Dudley. She was the sister of Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, one of the most important men in the court of Queen Elizabeth. Because of this background, Sidney grew up in an educated and influential environment. He studied first at Shrewsbury School and later at Christ Church, Oxford. Although he did not complete his degree, he became one of the most learned men of his time. He was highly educated and could speak several languages, including Latin, Greek, French, and Italian. This wide knowledge later helped him become a great poet, critic, and thinker. Sir Philip Sidney was not only a poet. He was also a courtier, diplomat, soldier, and literary critic. At the court of Queen Elizabeth I, he became famous for his intelligence, charm, and talent. Many people admired him, and he soon became one of the most respected young men in England. Sidney travelled to many countries in Europe, such as France, Germany, and Italy. During these travels, he learned the new ideas of the Renaissance. He studied literature, politics, and art, and these experiences strongly influenced his writing. Sidney was also brave in battle. He fought for England in the war against Spain. In 1586, during the Battle of Zutphen, he was seriously wounded. A few weeks later, he died at the young age of 31. Because of his great qualities, Sidney is often called the perfect Renaissance gentleman. He combined learning, bravery, politeness, and poetic talent in one person. He played an important role in bringing the sonnet tradition into English literature, and many later poets were influenced by him, including William Shakespeare, Edmund Spenser, and John Milton. Some of Sidney's most important works are Astrophil and Stella is his famous sequence of love sonnets. An apology for poetry is a defense of poetry and its value. Arcadia is a long story mixing adventure, love, and politics. The Lady of May is a shorter literary work written for the court. Astrophil and Stella is the first great sonnet sequence in English literature. It was written by Sir Philip Sidney around 1582. The work contains 108 sonnets and 11 songs. All of these poems together tell the story of Astrophil's deep love for Stella. The names themselves are very important. Astrophil means star lover, and Stella means star. So Astrophil is a lover who is always looking toward Stella, just as a person looks toward a star in the sky. Stella becomes his guide, his hope, and the center of his life. Many critics believe that Astrophil represents Sidney himself. Stella is usually believed to be Penelope Devereux. Sidney loved Penelope in real life, but she married another man. Because of this, his love could never be fulfilled. That is why the sonnets are full of pain, sadness, longing, and frustration. The lover wants Stella, but he cannot truly have her. Sonnet 1 is especially important because it is the opening poem of the whole sequence. It introduces the reader to Astrophil's feelings and to the main problem of the sequence. In this sonnet, Astrophil explains why he wants to write poetry. He hopes that if Stella reads his poems, she will understand his love, feel pity for him, and perhaps finally love him in return. So Sonnet 1 becomes the doorway to the entire sequence. It introduces both the lover and the purpose of his poetry. Let's read the text now. Loving in truth, and fain in verse my love to show, that she, dear she, might take some pleasure of my pain. Pleasure might cause her read, reading might make her know, knowledge might pity win, and pity grace obtain. I sought fit words to paint the blackest face of woe, studying inventions fine her wits to entertain, oft turning others' leaves, to see if thence would flow. some fresh and fruitful showers upon my sunburned brain. But words came halting forth, wanting invention's stay. Invention, nature's child, fled step-dame study's blows, and others' feet still seemed but strangers in my way. Thus great with child to speak and helpless in my throes, biting my truant pen, beating myself for spite, full, said my muse to me, look in thy heart, and write. The central idea of Sonnet 1 is that true poetry must come from genuine feeling. Astrophil sincerely loves Stella, and he wants to express that love in his poem. At first, however, he believes that he can write better if he copies other poets. He reads their books, borrows their style, and tries to use difficult and clever poetic techniques. But nothing works. The more he depends on other writers, the more confused and frustrated he becomes. He cannot find the right words because those borrowed words do not belong to his own heart. At the end of the sonnet, his muse gives him a very important lesson. She tells him to stop copying others and to write honestly from his own feelings. The famous line, look in thy heart, and write, teaches that the best poetry is natural and sincere. So the main message of the poem is very clear. True poetry comes from the heart. Real emotion is stronger than artificial learning. A poet should not depend too much on borrowed styles. Honesty and personal feeling are more important than clever language. In the opening line, Astrophil says that he is loving in truth. This means that his love for Stella is real and sincere. He is not pretending, and he is not writing simply to show his poetic skill. He truly loves her. He then says that he wants to show this love in verse. In other words, he wants to express his feelings through poetry. He hopes that if Stella reads his poem, she will understand how deeply he loves her. The next words are very important. That she, dear she, might take some pleasure of my pain. Astrophil is suffering because Stella does not love him in return. Yet he hopes that Stella will enjoy reading about that suffering. Sidney uses a paradox here because Astrophil's pain becomes Stella's pleasure. The phrase, pleasure of my pain, is also an oxymoron because it joins two opposite feelings together. This idea was very common in Renaissance love poetry. The lover is often shown as unhappy, helpless, and full of sorrow because the beloved is distant and cannot be won. Astrophil follows this tradition by presenting himself as a suffering lover. In the next two lines, Astrophil imagines a chain of events. First, Stella may enjoy the poem. Because she enjoys it, she may continue to read it. When she reads it, she may understand his love. Once she understands his feelings, she may begin to pity him. Finally, that pity may change into kindness or even love. The order of ideas is very important. Read, then know, then pity, then love. Sidney presents these ideas in a careful step-by-step order. This is called a logical sequence or cause and effect pattern. It is also an example of climax because each stage becomes stronger than the one before it. Astrophil believes that poetry can slowly change Stella's heart. In lines 5 and 6, Astrophil explains what he does after deciding to write about his love. He says, I sought fit words to paint the blackest face of woe. This means that he searches for the perfect words to describe his sadness. He wants his sorrow to sound beautiful and impressive in the poem. The phrase, blackest face of woe, means the deepest and darkest kind of suffering. Sidney uses a metaphor here. Woe, or sorrow, is imagined as a dark face. The word, blackest, also exaggerates the sadness, so it creates a feeling of extreme pain. Astrophil does not simply want to write naturally. Instead, he begins to study inventions fine. This means that he tries to learn clever poetic techniques. He looks for beautiful comparisons, difficult metaphors, and artistic expressions in order to make Stella admire his poem. He hopes that these clever ideas will entertain her wits, which means impress her mind and intelligence. An important point is that inventions fine refers to the rhetorical devices and poetic methods used by earlier writers. Astrophil believes that if he copies these techniques, he will become a better poet. In lines 7 and 8, he says that he is oft turning others' leaves. This means that he spends a great deal of time reading the books of other poets. The word leaves refers to the pages of those books. He hopes that by reading these poets, he will receive inspiration. He wishes that fresh and fruitful showers will flow from their writing onto his sunburned brain. This is one of the most beautiful metaphors in the sonnet. Astrophil compares his mind to dry, burnt land. His imagination is empty, tired, and unable to produce new ideas. Just as dry land needs rain, his mind needs inspiration. The fresh and fruitful showers represent new thoughts, creativity, and poetic energy. Astrophil hopes that the works of other poets will act like rain and make his mind fertile again. But there is also an important suggestion here. Because he depends too much on others, he is forgetting to trust his own feelings and imagination. In lines 9 to 11, Astrophil finally admits that all his efforts have failed. Even after reading other poets and borrowing their ideas, he still cannot write properly. He says, "But words came halting forth. The words do come, but they come slowly, weakly, and awkwardly. It is as if the words are limping instead of flowing naturally." He explains that the problem is that his invention is missing. In this poem, invention means imagination or creative power. Sidney personifies imagination and calls it nature's child. This means that true imagination is natural. It is born from the poet's own heart and feelings. However, this natural imagination has fled. Dame studies blows. Here Sidney gives another strong image. Study is compared to a cruel stepmother. A real mother would care for her child, but a stepmother in old stories is often shown as harsh and unkind. In the same way, too much study and too much dependence on rules, books, and borrowed styles have frightened away his natural imagination. So Sidney creates a sharp contrast between two things. On one side there is natural imagination, which comes from the heart. On the other side there is artificial learning, which comes from books and imitation. Sidney clearly shows that artificial learning cannot create true poetry. Then Astrophil says, "And others' feet still seemed but strangers in my way." The feet here refer to the poetic style and meter of other writers. Their style feels strange and unnatural to him. He tries to follow their path, but it does not suit him. Instead of helping him, the borrowed style only blocks his way. This is the most important conflict in the sonnet, the conflict between natural inspiration and artificial imitation. In lines 12 and 13, Astrophil becomes even more emotional. He says that he is great with child to speak. This means that he is full of thoughts and feelings that are waiting to come out. He desperately wants to speak, but he cannot. Sidney uses a very powerful metaphor here. Astrophil compares himself to a pregnant woman who is about to give birth. The ideas inside his mind are like a child inside the mother. He is helpless in my throes, which means he is suffering like a woman in labor. The word throes means the painful struggles of childbirth. This metaphor shows that writing poetry is not easy. It is painful, difficult, and full of struggle. Astrophil has deep feelings inside him, but he cannot turn them into words. Because of this frustration, he says that he is biting my truant pen, beating myself for spite. He bites his pen because he is angry and desperate. The pen is called truant, as if it were a lazy schoolboy who refuses to do his work. Astrophil also becomes angry with himself. He feels helpless because he knows that he has feelings to express, but he still cannot write them. The childbirth image is one of the most striking ideas in the whole sonnet. The poet is like a woman in labor. The poem is like the child waiting to be born.